Welcome to our Meet the Candidate Forum for the local 2021 Manchester by the Sea town election, which is scheduled for Tuesday, May 18th. I'm Erica Brown, editor of the Manchester Cricket. There are 4 candidates running for 2 open seats on the planning board, which is the only contested election this year. Today we have, in alphabetical order, Sarah Creighton, Gar Morse, and Laura Tenney. Christine D'Alicio, who's also running, was unable to join us. First, I'd like to start by introducing everyone, or at least have everyone introduce themselves. So let's start alphabetically. Sarah Creighton, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Erica and the Cricket for hosting this forum. I think it's a great way to introduce people to the candidates. So I think I've been in town for more than 20 years, and I moved here because of Manchester is such a great place, has a great character. I have worked in many capacities within town government. Most of you some of you may know me because I was the chair of the Manchester Essex Regional High School Building Committee, which was a long process, and we had a fabulous committee that worked across both towns of Manchester and Essex. I also was on the school committee during the early days of regionalization. And when I first moved to Manchester, I was on the Manchester Planning Board for a year and a half. Prior to coming to Manchester, I was on the Newbury Planning Board. Newbury was undergoing significant growth, and we had large subdivisions, which were challenging to say the least. And so I now have time to come back to planning board issues, which are really very related to my academic experience in urban and environmental policy planning and civil engineering, as well as my professional experience in sustainability, campus sustainability, and sustainability within state government. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. All right, Gar, your turn.
Okay, I'm Gar Morse. I've lived here for 42 years in the same house, has the same carpet. It hasn't been repainted once, and it still looks great as far as I'm concerned. I am in the real estate development and investment business. We started our company about 30 years ago, and we work for pension funds and insurance companies and endowments, and we make commercial real estate investments for them. So that's all I'm going to say. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Gar. Laura, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Erica, and the other candidates. Great to meet you all. My name's Laura Tenney, and thank you for hosting today. I'm definitely the relative newcomer to town. I've been in Manchester for 5 years. Moved here in 2016, participated as a new resident in the community visioning for the master plan that was being updated at that time. Thought it was a really good process, and I think the master plan serves as a great kind of roadmap and guide for us. I previously served Manchester's town government for a year as an alternate on the zoning board to fill a vacancy at that time. Let's see what else. I live on Pine Street with my husband and my 18-year-old daughter, who is just about to graduate from the terrific Manchester Essex schools. Some of my favorite things about Manchester are its natural resources and its beautiful downtown, cycling the beautiful roads, hiking in the Mecht Woods on all the trails, just up the street from me, paddleboarding from Tux Point, walking home from the train station in winter and stopping at the library and sitting by the fireplace. I mean, there are just so many wonderful things about Manchester, shopping and dining in the downtown. So all of those are just make it such a special place to be. And the reason I'm running for the planning board is just to lend my professional expertise. I'm a campus planner and a licensed landscape architect. I work at MIT in the Office of Campus Planning, where I've been for going on 10 years. And much of my career has been in higher ed on campuses, also at Wellesley at Harvard, managing planning, design, and construction of campus projects. And I'm just here to help realize the guiding principles of the master plan.
That's great. Thanks for your introductions. Starting with a general sort of overview question. I'd love each one of you to prioritize 3 major planning board challenges that are facing the town, and what solutions do you propose to meet those challenges? Gar, why don't we start with you?
Oh, thank you, Erica. As you know, I complained to you about these questions because I call them not open-ended. But the real reason I complained is I don't know the answers to any of these questions. So you'd have to wait until I get a little more experience. I'm not a planner. I actually have a lot of experience in finance and development. But and in general, I am not averse to planning. However, nor do I believe that a plan, a master plan, or a planning board should be authoritative in terms of what happens in the town. And as far as challenges, I think there are plenty of challenges that confront the planning board, not the least of which their meetings are much too long, and they should tighten it up a little bit. I talked to the guy, Ron, the other night, and he was very nice. We had a very cordial conversation, but I told him he needed to shut some people up. We have a lot of air, hot air circulating at those meetings, and we need to put a cork in it a little bit and try to deal with the concrete issues as opposed to just going on and on. That's my take.
That's actually, I mean, I know your experience is extensive in terms of town participation on boards. So when you say you're not involved with planning, you do know. But I appreciate what you're saying about the planning board meetings, because that is true. So next, Sarah Creighton, how about you?
Thanks. I wanted to just start by saying that I think that the recent SLV 40B project will have a lasting effect on discussion of planning in Manchester. The planning board doesn't really have any jurisdiction over that project, but I do think it's going to have a big ripple effect. Now for three issues, there are many, but I think the three issues are actually reflected in your questions that you ask, and so we're going to be touching on them. I don't need to get into great detail. I think the proposed zoning changes to modernize and update the zoning are a challenge, because it's a huge, complex set of bylaws that govern people's property. And so in my experience, having been on the Manchester Planning Board, Newbury Planning Board, hopefully the Manchester Planning Board again, as well as the school committee and the school building committee, I've touched on people's homes, their money or in their taxes, and their kids. So those are all really touchy issues, and we have to respect the fact that people have strongly held opinions about their money, their homes, and their children, and that they're all interrelated. And part of the great thing about Manchester is we do a pretty good job of dealing with all of those. So the zoning changes is one. The second is the limited commercial district. It's critical that we deliberate about how to deal with that, and I think we're going to be talking about that later. But I do think we should be thinking about it in terms of outcomes that we want, rather than just uses. But for example, do we want what kind of aesthetic do we want? What kind of groundwater recharge do we want? What kinds of scale and size do we want? And then the third issue sort of touches on what Gar said, the business of the subdivision of land and the mechanism of getting your business, your special permit, your subdivision of land through the planning board. I think boards in town have often taken a long time to get to a decision, and I think we can do a little better about the monthly business of the planning board. And I think I have some experience in running complex, challenging, and contentious projects that hopefully can help make them less so.
Yeah. Hello, regionalization. Okay, Laura Tenney.
Yeah, thanks. Two hard acts to follow. Sarah and Gar both gave really thoughtful answers. I think among the challenges and the opportunities facing the town, certainly the housing, diversity of housing, having different kinds of housing that really foster a community of inclusiveness, diversity, equity. We're, I think, 83% or something in single family housing. We have very little multifamily. A project that comes along like the SLV, which is, feels sort of like a threat of of a project that the town has very little control over. I think affordable housing and getting out in front of that and really embracing that as a goal to provide equity and diversity is a primary opportunity and challenge. And then I think related to that, but specifically on the topic of the LCD creating an overlay district and thinking about smart growth or transit-oriented overlay district that allows us to have opportunities for different kinds of housing and retail and mixed use all built in, thinks about mobility, gives people choices for ways to connect to the downtown and to transit, uses low impact development to recharge groundwater, perhaps design guidelines, might be part of that conversation about what do we want it to look and feel like, what's the scale of the development. So that's two. And then I would say third, and this is one that really resonates for me in my work, and also just the values that I hold, is everything I think that we should come through the lens of sustainability and climate resiliency. We're a coastal town, our economy and our character and this place really depends on us thinking about climate change and really incorporating that. And it can be an opportunity, when we think about land conservation, we have a lot of land already in conservation, maybe 30%, but when you put land in conservation, on the one hand, that takes it off the tax rolls. On the other hand, if you're smart about it and you're preserving watersheds and water quality and water supply, you're also avoiding the cost of infrastructure. So thinking about those kinds of things as we are kind of methodical and thoughtful about, the limited and careful ways in which we want to grow.
It's really good. Okay, so let's shift. You've all mentioned the master plan, so I'd like to actually focus on that because it's a good segue. Let's talk about the master plan. What do you see as being the goals of the master plan, and what role do you think the planning board has regarding them?
The master plan process, I actually sat on that committee, had two parts. One was a visioning process, and the second was a more specific set of tasks. And the challenge for the planning board is to actually take those general statements, because they really are general statements, and make them specific particularly in zoning. And I think that's getting from here to there is really challenging, and we shouldn't underestimate how challenging that is, because you can want something conceptually, but when it's in your backyard, it may feel different. And we talked about that a lot in the master planning process. So I think also the vision that was articulated in the planning process, Laura, you said you went to the meetings, I suspect Gar, you did as well, was to manage town growth and development and to honor the town's character and to balance revenues. And those are connected. There's three legs of the stool, as well as to prioritize diverse housing options and along walkable neighborhoods and the dynamic downtown and a strong public school system. So I do think that is a lens, and it's kind of the lens through which the planning board can evaluate all of its proposals and decide if the outcomes are going to meet those broad set of goals. I do think that some of the specifics in the plan should be continuously evaluated, and I have some thoughts about those that I'll maybe have a chance to talk about a little bit later specifically with the limited commercial district when we talk about that. But I think the benefit of the master plan is it creates a vision, and the challenge is to move that vision from the abstract into the specific, and recognizing that you can't please all the people all the time, and that is the real challenge.
Yeah, we will be talking about the limited commercial district because it's huge. Gar, one thing that's interesting in your written statement in the paper, you referred to the master plan as that it should be a living document, and I thought that was an interesting phrasing. So I'd love you to talk about the master plan and the role of the planning board, but also maybe a little bit about that and what you meant.
So my feeling is the master plan should be updated, not every 6 months, but it should be a document that we look at and say, well, gee, that was just right in 2000, whatever it was, 18 or 19 or something, but it's now 2022 and things have changed. One of the big flaws of our planning process is we got stuck with this ridiculous 40B situation where we got whatever it is, 300 units that it doesn't comply with anything. And I am very much against it. I think it's a terrible, terrible project. And I'm a builder of big projects. We built a big project, the 60-acre project on Route 128. It turned out the town we built it in had failed on a number of efforts, and they finally came to us because I guess we were the bottom of the list. And they came in, and we came in and built it. And it's turned out to be great. It produces about $1.5 million of tax revenues. It's a huge positive for the town, the school system, and everything. It happens to be a retail project, but it's turned out great. And it was on a dump. It was on a not a contaminated, but a questionable landfill. And so big projects are not always bad. In the case of the 40B, that's an ill-conceived project, both environmentally, financially, and from a community planning standpoint. As you can tell, I'm not too ambivalent about this. I'm pretty certain about my point of view there. I believe that the master plan failed to understand and grasp the challenge that the town was going to be faced as it relates to affordable housing. I own a building, my wife and I own a building in downtown Manchester. You've all been walked by it. And every tenant in that building, it's a 8-unit building, every tenant in that building is affordable. The rents are around $1,000 a month. Those are the nicest people I know. Don't be afraid of affordable housing. It's a great thing, and it makes our town stronger. So I think the master plan blew it, if you will, by not encompassing that challenge and driving us to some decisions on that subject. So that's an example of where I think the master plan, as good as it is, and it's a lot better than no plan at all, that's for sure. But that's where a master plan needs to be looked at and changed as we go through and learn things. And I think we're learning a lot every month that goes by about our town. So I love this town. I happen to be a strong believer in the free enterprise system and the capitalist system, but I'm a raving lefty. So put that together in your pipe and smoke it. But I do believe in business, and I think that to the extent that we can let the free enterprise system operate in our town, I'm for it. I like it. There are some cases where the government, that's us, the planning board, needs to step in and say, wait a minute, there are some reasonable things that need to be done here. And so I understand and I support that. But basically, I like letting people do what they want to do with their property.
Just to correct, I believe you said that the SLV project is 300 units. It's actually 136 as it stands right now in its proposal.
Wrong. I was wrong. I was being a little hyperbolic. I apologize.
Laura, I'm going to repeat the question. What do you see as being the goals of the master plan, and what is the role of the planning board regarding them?
There are several goals of the master plan. Some of the ones that I highlighted in my article for the Cricket are, sort of starting from the foundation, preserving the town's character and the natural resources, and responsibly managing and planning for growth. Growth at a modest scale, growth where it's appropriate, where it strengthens the local community and economy, and considers its sources of funding. So I think change happens. My neighbor runs the Stanley's Garage, which used to be his great uncle's blacksmith shop in Manchester. I mean, the change happens and there's continuity too, and it remains a wonderful town. So I think we can, as I said, some of the other parts of the master plan, embracing inclusivity and diversity among housing types and people, that those housing types will draw more diversity in people, encouraging sustainable options for transit and mobility and increasing resiliency to climate change. I think the role of the planning board really is to take those guiding principles in the master plan, which I think are strong. I mean, I think the master plan as a vision document is very strong. It went through a lot of public process. It is a living document. I agree with Gar on that. I think it doesn't, we should always be looking at it and questioning it, but I don't think it needs to be, sort of rethought right now. I think the challenge now is to implement it. And so to get to the granular level of recodifying zoning regulations, performing land use studies, but always with the planning board keeping a kind of the higher master plan goals in our sites to guide those studies as we think about the needs of the town and the resources that it will require. And I think that as we think about the zoning, performance-based zoning, green infrastructure, things that really think about bring it up to today's standards and best practices for how we think about development and how to mitigate the environmental impacts of development is important. And I really liked what Gar said about redeveloping, renewing sites that are not, green sites, never before developed sites. We can do a lot with modest infill, with redeveloping, say, the DPW yard. We've got sites that could be definitely useful and well positioned for redevelopment to take them to a higher and better use and actually benefit the town in redevelopment of those sites.
Yeah, that's really good. Really interesting. Now, we've been talking about we've already started talking about the LCD and sort of the limited commercial district, and everyone's sort of brought it up. So why don't we sort of stay there for the next question? And then what I'd like to do is go over to housing and the variety of housing types and our housing production plan. So that's what I'd love to do. So let's start with the LCD, the master plan, which people think it only talks about the limited commercial district, but it doesn't. It's really a master plan for the entire town. But the master plan does call for the limited commercial district, which is a 60 or so acre district. It's actually larger than that, to yield revenues, much needed revenues for the town. So I'd love to know each of your opinion on what should happen there with the limited commercial district with regards to the planning board and what it's reviewing now. Laura, you just talked about an overlay district that the planning board is actually considering currently. So that's really interesting. But on a general way, should the district be augmented on a limited capacity, or should it be fully developed sort of with a functional kind of mixed use neighborhood approach, or what should happen there is really sort of my question. So Sarah, let's start with you.
As you articulated, the goals for the LCD as described in the master plan are twofold. One is to balance revenues with the appropriate uses of the district. And the question that the planning board, I think, is wrestling with is how do you change zoning, create an overlay list district to get what we want? I think that one of the questions is the capacity of the sewer capacity in that region. We have currently don't have sewer capacity by moratorium that may free up, but there was a lot of study done a couple of years ago about extending our using our sewer capacity to service other areas of town that's not the LCD. So we're going to have to actually intersect those two issues of the sewer capacity, the cost of sewer extension to whatever area of town. So I think hasn't been fully reconciled, and the notion that we can just extend the sewer to that area of town may or may not be the right decision. But as I said, one of the goals is to increase the revenues from the LCD. And the master plan points out that 95% of the town's revenues comes from the residential tax base currently. And suggests that several $1 million in new town revenue could be realized from uses in the LCD. So if you work backwards from that, a $3 million revenue from the current tax rate is an assessed value of about $250 million of built in out there. So that's 46 or about 45 Manchester Athletic Clubs or 250 of the existing doctors' offices. So that scale is quite large, and I'm not sure people have connected that dot. That said, to Gar's point, perhaps we need to revisit the master plan and wonder if that goal of several million is the right goal, given what we now know and what we've learned about from SLV about people's reaction to scale of that size. So we can kind of maybe revise that vision a bit and really think about scale and appropriateness and the resources that are there that have really been talked about a lot in the recent past. So I think that I think a lot about capacity as well on schools. When we built the high school, middle school, high school, and the memorial school, the state's goals for the size of those schools is based on the current enrollment, and the state did not forecast or allow us to build for a forecast of significant growth. So we have a state policy that's saying you can only build schools at a certain size, and then you have a state policy that's saying we want significant more housing. So again, that's another capacity issue that's going to have to be reconciled. And so residential development of significant numbers in the LCD runs again against that capacity issue. In my opinion, I think we want clean businesses that augment the tax base and support the business community in our downtown, rather than compete with that. And potentially, if we do have housing, there's a lot of talk about housing that is for older, for 55 plus or 65 plus, and that might be a use, and I know that's been discussed. So I have a lot to learn about where the current thinking among the work that's been done with the planning board already, because they've thought a lot about this, and I would certainly want to come up to speed about what exactly has been thought about first before I impose my own opinions too much beyond this. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Laura, how about you? What are your thoughts on the LCD and what should be there?
It's an opportunity for revenue generating development, but I agree strongly that the scale is important to Manchester, and we should be thinking about that. And revenue for the sake of revenue alone is not the goal here. I think it's really revenue and appropriate development for the town that keeps the character of the town. So I think mixed use might be good up there if we could, diversify the housing and add some businesses. I agree a lot with what Sarah said about supporting the downtown. I think some of our downtown, the kind of modest infill of the downtown really should be in concert with anything we consider with the LCD. So I would say, I have a lot to learn about it too. The sewer and the schools capacity is an interesting one. Schools, when I read in the master plan that a large percentage of the town's residents are 60 and over, that makes me think that they're, are we on the decline with school-aged kids, or are there lots of new families moving in? We certainly want to encourage, a good attendance at our schools to bring in the state funding for the, kind of per pupil head and to keep our school vibrant. And then on the sewer capacity, another really interesting one that probably bears some technical digging into. There's been a conversation about regionalizing sewer and water treatment. We should be looking into that. I also think I'm not sure about this yet, but if our sewers are combined, meaning they take both stormwater and sewerage, then there's a lot of capacity that you can realize by separating the sewers, by repairing sewers, by repairing storm drains so that groundwater is not infiltrating them, and basically keeping the water, the fairly clean water, storm water, out of your sewerage so that you have capacity for future development where you should need it, and so that you're also recharging water back into the ground and using your water wisely and not treating it as a waste product. When many of our New England towns were developed 100 years ago or more, the thought was, let's put the water in a pipe and get it out to the ocean as quickly as possible, and all the waste kind of goes with that. There's a lot of history around the way Boston was developed in a way that polluted its tidelands at the time. So I think all of these things have to be studied together. And I'd reinforce what Sarah said about, the appropriate right-sized development, but that it's based in sustainability and that it wants to be, I think it doesn't want to be a separate sort of, auto-oriented medical clinics and other sort of drive to businesses, but really should extend kind of a pedestrian and open space network, should cluster development, whatever it is. So I think that overlay is really important so that development is clustered, so that open space is preserved and is not fragmented into kind of leftover spaces, but instead strengthens our trail network, thinks about where the watershed is. So environmental review is going to be certainly important in this process as well.
Great. Gar.
So I was going to say, I would go back in history and say there was a company called New England Biolab that wanted to create a headquarters and facility for their operations in Manchester. And this was, gosh, I think it was 20 years ago. We turned them down. We said, no, we don't want you, go away. If New England Biolabs built on the limited commercial district, they would probably build a 400,000 square foot office lab operations facility. And if you've actually visited the New England, the present New England Biolabs facility, it makes MIT look like a disaster. It is so beautiful. It makes Harvard sad by comparison. The New England Biolabs facility that ended up being built not in Manchester is gorgeous. Any town would die to have that. The assessed value of the New England Biolabs is easily in the $200 to $300 million range. I think, and Sarah is great on these numbers. In fact, I plan to vote for it. But anyway, she's right. If we could get something that was assessed at that level, we could produce the type of revenues that the master plan is looking for. And I would be in favor of that. I actually don't want to turn the limited commercial district into a mini Newburyport or a mini Marblehead or a mini Nantucket with housing, retail, office, factory, whatever. I don't think it's appropriate. I think that is a wonderful site for a major user, and there are plenty out there right now. All you have to do is drive around Cambridge, and they're coming out to the suburbs. This could be easily the type of thing that could answer the needs that we have from a jobs standpoint, and to provide a welcome and contributing member of our community that we've never had before. We've never had a big company that cared about Manchester. If you go to many of the towns along 128 and look at the big corporate users, they're major contributors, not just money, but in terms of people, in terms of facilities, in terms of all sorts of great things that they do for the communities where they're located. We shouldn't be afraid of having a major operation of that type in our town, in my view. That's I think that sometimes planners, and I respect planners, I don't always like them, I respect them, have idealistic vision of what can be created. And I'm not so sure that if you don't let the free enterprise, here I go again, system work, that we couldn't find a wonderful user along the lines of the one we shooed away from us a few years ago that would come in there and do a great job. So this is a little different than the doctrinaire type policies that we might be listening to from the planning community, but I think it needs to be considered, and it could be done without any burden on our schools, without any burden on our water supply, and without any burden on our sewer water treatment facility. These types of operations are self-contained.
Great.
And so I'd say let's let's keep our eyes open for something like that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gar. There's two things that are going on right now with the planning board. Number one, they're in the middle of recodification, where they're essentially editing and streamlining and modernizing the zoning bylaw. At the same time, Manchester just updated and submitted to the state the housing production plan. Those two things are very related. So I want to talk about housing. One of the things that the housing production plan said, and Laura, you mentioned this, you called this out, is that Manchester really needs to focus on the variety of housing types. And when I say variety, I'm not talking about affordable housing, although affordable housing was within that. I'm talking about the different types of housing and making sure that it matches the demographic trends that are happening with our community. So I'd like you to talk about whether you agree that Manchester needs to expand the variety of housing types that it has, whether it's small dwellings or ADUs, all those things, apartments, condos, all the things that, multifamilies, the things that would require special permits in many cases. What role do you think that zoning plays? Is there an opportunity for things to perhaps become as a matter of right? How do you think Manchester should move to match the goals that are in the housing production plan as it goes through recodification? So let's start with Laura Tenney.
Thanks, Erica. Just to respond quickly to Gar's comment about a big tenant coming in, I think that could be great for the town in terms of revenue. And I think my only point to counter that is just that with the right guidelines and overlay, that you could both support, a big biotech firm or something to that degree, but make sure that the way you shape the development in the physical form is suits the town, doesn't create, too much traffic congestion and provide some amenities. So I'm with you there, Gar. As far as the housing, I'm a deep believer that we need to expand the type of housing. I feel very fortunate to be here in Manchester, but I moved here when I was 50. I certainly couldn't have gotten here earlier given the housing type. I'm feel very privileged to have put my daughter through middle and high school here. The school's wonderful. We have so much to offer. And I would just like others to be able to benefit from, life in this town. And I think we can do it in a way that doesn't diminish the character. And, you think about our downtown, some of those one-story buildings used to be two-story. So you could have residents, apartments, condos on top of the retail, which frankly would do so much for our downtown business community, because you need a certain critical mass of people to keep these businesses alive and thriving. And we want to see more business in downtown and some of these other districts. So I think bringing more people in, so long as you preserve the scale, is a good thing. We'll obviously planning for the infrastructure and schools and so forth to support them. I think the accessory dwelling unit is something that we should be looking carefully at too. I think it has potentially a lot of benefit for multi-generational families, in-law apartment, or a lot of us have been living with grown kids, during COVID. Things have certainly changed. I think the way people are living and working is changing. A lot more people are working from home. So being able to support that with the accessory dwelling unit, to me, makes a lot of sense. And then if we think of overlay districts or redeveloping the DPW yard, for example, absolutely, we should be looking at multifamily housing there. And it doesn't mean it's the 130, stacked apartment double loaded corridors. It can be nicely scaled, attractive, townhouses, duplexes, a mix of single family or multifamily, and an extension of pedestrian and streetscape and open spaces to support them. And then lastly, I would say about senior housing, we're all headed that way someday, right? And we hope, if you want to be able to age in place in Manchester, it's hard to do that right now. We shouldn't be segregating our seniors. I think there are too many of these senior care living centers that are really kind of out. You can't get anywhere on foot. I think to allow seniors to be able to walk downtown, or at least walk around their neighborhoods, hopefully, still be able to get to the library and the train and the downtown shops, and this mixing, not segregating different ages, but what I like about adding apartments and multifamily and senior living all kind of mixed in together is the mix of ages and the cross-pollination with people who are different from yourself, either in circumstance or age or whatever it may be. So support
Okay.
those. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Laura. Gar?
I think Laura is pretty smart. That's what I think. And I agree with a lot of what she says. I am a big supporter of a mix of housing, a mix of income, and get ready for this. Fasten your seatbelt. Manchester has no measurable people of color. Okay, Wellesley has it, Weston has it, Lexington has it, Concord has it. Manchester, unmeasurable. What's wrong with this town? I lean left, but I am not a bleeding heart. But I'd like to know why we have no representation of people of color to speak of in this town. We need to do something about it. It may have nothing to do with the planning board, but that's one of the things that we need to do. And I'm not just talking about all people of color are poor people. You know, it's not true. We need to do something about this deliberately. And I'm not saying we need quotas or anything or laws or anything, but we need to talk about it. So that may be completely off topic, and I apologize. You can edit this out if you want to. But I believe we should have a mix of housing. I think we are fortunate in town that we have neighborhoods. You know, sure, there are a lot of rich people out on Smith's Point, but there are some pretty damn nice people on Pleasant Street and on Old Essex Road. And we need to encourage housing of all levels to be built in our town. I am completely in favor of taking some of these sites that are within walking district, and I would call it a walking district. You heard it here first, folks. The walking district, that we have multifamily housing in the walking district. And that walking district could encompass, going out to Pleasant Street and Old Essex Road and some of these places, and Jersey Lane, where I live. We need to have multifamily, income, and I love the idea of auxiliary housing units to encourage people to make better use of some of these big barns they live in, where they have two people living in a 7,000 square foot house or worse. So I would be in favor of that. We got to do it reasonably and rationally and not be an irritant to the whole neighborhood, but this can be done. So that's my speech. Sorry about the pigment thing. Just had to say it.
It's all good. Actually, that does have to do with planning. Sarah?
Well, I think that there's been some good ideas here, and I do think that a diversity of housing is an important goal. The question is, how does a planning board and zoning in particular get this there? And I'm not sure about that. One of the things that you can see all over town is that smaller houses are being made bigger. And one of the things that was articulated in the master planning process was the concern about the cost of entry to buying a home. So if the small homes are getting bought as a less expensive than a larger home and then making larger, then we're kind of perpetuating the problem. And I'm not sure how the planning board, which can help with that, except to create specific requirements for particular lots or particular types. So that is a challenge. I think that market conversion to more and more expensive homes is a challenging one for the planning board to really deal with. Zoning does have a role to identify key areas where higher density is appropriate and keeping it at the right scale. I think also my experience in Newbury with these large subdivisions is that the town needs to make sure that they have the right tools in place. I'm echoing. I think, Gar, if you turn off your mic, if you mute, that will help. That if the town has the right oversight if they put in performance bonds and really can ensure that any developments are done according to plan. The other thing is that you touched on, Erica, is that the town is recodifying zoning. And we've talked a lot about that these things are going to happen by zoning. So as I don't know if we're going to have time if you're going to ask about that. But just quickly, I think that there are.
No, please talk about it actually, because I'm combining those.
Okay. Yeah. I think that there are two pieces. One is that first of all, to acknowledge that the planning board's been working hard on this for about 2 years. So as a new planning board member, I'd want to find out what exactly was the thought process. But I think that my experience with technical projects and advancing them is that they're hard to advance because they are complicated. And I think the planning board can do a little better about separating two ways of communicating. One is the technical presentation of material, the weeds, so to speak, that the board needs to get into. And last night, if you sat in on that presentation about zoning changes, that was a weedy technical presentation. And it was not the right forum for a public forum. A public forum needs to give the public who might only have time to participate on occasion, but cares deeply about the issues, to say, what are we trying to do? Why are we doing it? What is it? And how will it affect you or me? So when you mix those two types of presentation styles in one meeting, we end up with some of the challenges that we have about where does this process end up, and criticism of process because the process for two different types of things have been merged. And so I think that the planning board is going to have to build some trust and maintain that trust to advance these important issues, as well as I mentioned earlier, to just get the business of every month routine matters done.
I think that's actually, you teed me up. It's a great segue for what I wanted to kind of end on. And I don't need this to be extensive at all, but given the fact anyone who's watched the planning board and participated in the planning board in the last year understands that, you know, board communication has been a challenge. And Sarah, you teed that up perfectly. What would you say if you were elected to your future colleagues in the planning board? And if you're elected, let's start with you, Gar.
I absolutely agree with you, Erica, that there has been some fireworks and it's unnecessary, honestly. We need to have a level of decorum and respect, and people need to do their homework carefully and try not to exhaust a lot of hot air unnecessarily. I think that it puts a huge burden on the chairman of these committees to maintain that level of operating effectiveness. Number one, I would limit the time of every meeting. And you say, but we won't get to, yes, I know, except we're going to also limit the time for each subject within the agenda. I believe that people need to be disciplined and not just talk on endlessly. So number one, limit the time. Number two, have a level of discipline, which is when arguments come up and are not moving the ball forward, I would want the chairman to say, all right, Gar and Sarah, you're having a timeout now. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. So there needs to be discipline. I run a lot of meetings in my business, and I have 1 hour meetings, and fie on that person who makes us run over the 1 hour. We have strong discipline in every meeting we do. I think we need to do it, and we need to remember you have to be polite.
Everything you just said, Gar, was actually very interesting and very insightful, but you didn't answer the question. The question was, what would you say to your future colleagues?
Oh, I would make that speech to the future colleagues, I guess.
Okay. Laura, what would you say to your new colleagues if you were elected?
Sarah and Gar both made great points. We're a small community. We're a community of neighbors. We all love and cherish our little seaside town here. We care about protecting it. So I would say let's begin from a place of mutual respect for each other. mutual respect. Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. Let's give the benefit of the doubt and respect to the town professional staff, our town planner, our town manager. These people are, competent professionals. Let's believe the science. Let's do our careful due diligence. And I agree with Gar completely about running a tight meeting. I think all of us here in our work are accustomed to working on complex teams of multidisciplinary people and running meetings. You can get a lot done in an hour, and perhaps, putting some processes in that would build trust in saying every speaker is going to be limited to 2 minutes and then we'll respond. Whatever it is that people feel like they have a chance to be heard, they have a chance to make their voices heard, but you don't kind of lose heart and faith in the process. And I think I watched the planning board meeting last night. I agree that the communication was, it is a down in the weeds topic. The way it was presented was not helpful for the kind of, public watching. It was way too, there wasn't a sort of comparison of here's what we had, here's where we're going, the reasons why to do that. It was a kind of quick scrolling through a lot of legalese, which is not to criticize the hard work of the planning board. I think they're all doing their job and getting really detailed about it. But the way you communicate with sort of the public at large may be different than the kind of technical meetings that you need to have. So, bringing some efficiencies to it, but just really remembering that we're all professionals. We all, we're competent people. We have varied kinds of experiences, but we're bringing it because we care about the town. We care about our neighbors, and let's create a town that is resilient for today and for future generations. We all can share that goal. And if we're going to devote a lot of time and energy to the effort, let's be collegial and let's enjoy working together, and let's value each other and our mutual contributions.
Amen, sister.
Thank you.
All right, Sarah, close us out here.
I think I would like to say to colleagues, thank you for your time. This is hard work. Thank you to the chair for hard work during COVID and trying to run these meetings on Zoom. It's really, that in and of itself is challenging. I also would say, I don't think we, the planning board, needs to agree on every matter. We don't need to find consensus necessarily. And I'm not sure I have Emily Post, Gar, but I do have Robert's Rules of Order on my bookshelf. And I think the planning board will be well served to calls for some votes, move things on. In this, I'll just aside on the school building project, one of the very early votes, I voted against the winning side of that vote. It was one of the major consultants, and I ended up having to live with that outcome for 8 years. The committee decided, and I was in the minority. So the other thing is, I think that the planning board, if we're the planning board, that questioning process without suggesting specific and productive ways to move forward creates an adversarial atmosphere. So one suggestion I would make is that rather than questioning process, but to suggest proposals rather than criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I would encourage colleagues to remember is that policymaking does not, sorry, Erica, happen in the letters to the editor in the Cricket or on Facebook. So sticking to the facts of the meetings and taking input as simply one person's opinion, I think can really help. We have, many of us, gotten very worked up about, a letter from one person or a Facebook post from one person. So I hope that if I go to the planning board, I will come prepared, also to remain open to new ideas and commit to being willing to change my mind.
Thank you very much. This was a really healthy discussion. I think we got into a lot of great things. I would love to have this kind of discussion more often. This is fantastic. Thank you very much to Sarah Creighton, to Gar Morse, to Laura Tenney for running and for participating in this forum. It was incredibly helpful. Manchester's town election is on Tuesday, May 18th at Manchester Essex Memorial High School on Lincoln Street. Information can be found at the town website, which is at manchester.ma.us. You can also contact Diane Bucco, who is the new town clerk of Manchester. She's very helpful, and you can call her at 978-526-2040. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody, for participating.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Erica, for
Erica.
hosting us.
All
Great
right.
to speak with you all.